Okay, everybody, I'm going to do this recording a little different. I'm not going to have the video going. It makes the files really, really large, and so I'm just going to do this record audio and then create a video from that. So, welcome to Anatomy and Physiology, Chapter 22, where we are covering the autonomic nervous system. Chapter 22. The objectives of this chapter are to identify the role of the autonomic nervous system and its two major subdivisions, compare and contrast the structures of the parasympathetic and sympathetic pathways, identify the autonomic neurotransmitters and receptors and where they are found, also explain their functional advantages. Continuing with the objectives, number 4 is to discuss the function of the autonomic nervous system as a whole. And number 5, the last one, compare and specify the functions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system, ANS, it's a component of the peripheral nervous system that we discussed in the last chapter. It regulates involuntary physiological functions, and these can be the heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, respiratory rate, and glandular secretions. The ANS operates below the level of conscious control to maintain the body's homeostasis and its response to stress. The role of the autonomic nervous system is that it's responsible for regulating the body's internal environment by controlling the functions of smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and the glands, and it ensures that vital processes will continue without much conscious effort, without any conscious effort. And it also helps adapt to changes, both internal and external. And it does this by maintaining homeostasis. Every day, every minute, your body is adjusting heart rate, your blood pressure. You're regulating your digestive process throughout the day, which regulates your metabolic rates. You're controlling the contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles and your digestion, respiratory, and the urogenital systems. You're not doing this consciously, but it's just happening. Your body's on autopilot, you can say. It modulates glandular secretions like saliva, sweat, hormones, and it coordinates responses to stress through the fight or flight response. Okay, a little bit about the structure here. The autonomic nervous system has three main divisions: the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the sometimes forgotten enteric. And let's go ahead and talk about those. The sympathetic nervous system, it activates that fight or flight response I mentioned. It prepares your body for stress or for an emergency. It has an effect on your heart rate, so it'll increase your heart rate. It'll increase the force of contraction. It dilates bronchial passages and pupils. It'll inhibit digestion and stimulate glucose release for energy. It increases blood flow to the muscles and stimulates sweating. And it'll constrict blood vessels in non-essential areas so you can prioritize the vital organs. There are neurotransmitters that are involved with this, primarily norepinephrine, with some pathways that use acetylcholine. Within the parasympathetic nervous system, it functions as the rest and digest system, the rest and digest response versus the fight or flight. So it does this by conserving energy and supporting maintenance functions. What it affects is your heart rate. So it'll decrease your heart rate, constrict bronchial passages and pupils. It stimulates digestion. It increases peristalsis, and then it promotes salivation for other digestive activities. It'll enhance your glucose storage in the liver and then increases blood flow to the digestive organs. The transmitters that are involved in this, neurotransmitters, is primarily acetylcholine. So all this is done in coordination. There's an antagonistic effect where the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems usually have opposing effects on an organ. This helps provide this fine control over the body functions. So for example, the sympathetic nervous system speeds up the heart rate during stress, while the Parasympathetic nervous system slows it down during relaxation. Now, the enteric nervous system, enteric just means gastrointestinal. Um, so this is a not often mentioned uh, system. It's a complex network within the gastrointestinal tract that manages digestion and nutrient absorption. It can operate independently of the central nervous system, but it's influenced by both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic inputs. Um, what does it do? It regulates motility. Um it helps with secretion. It regulates blood flow, immune response in the gut. So these together will ensure that the body's internal environment is precisely regulated. It's adapting to different physiological needs and maintaining that homeostasis. Okay, the organization of the autonomic nervous system. So figure 22-1 shows organization of the autonomic nervous system. It says note the simple arc pattern to information flow in the diagram. So the ANS is crucial for controlling involuntary physiological functions like heart rate and digestion. And again, it's divided here in the picture. It's just an illustration how it's divided into those three main divisions we mentioned: the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the enteric. A little bit more on the little arc pattern and communication. You have a sensory input. You have receptors that detect changes in the body like blood pressure, temperature, and then you have sensory neurons, afferent pathways that send this information to the central nervous system. There's an integration that happens where the CNS includes the brainstem and the spinal cord, processes and integrates all this sensory information. It uses interneurons to decide on some appropriate response. And then you have an efferent pathway where you have motor neurons that carry signals from the central nervous system to target organs. You also have autonomic ganglia that serve as relay stations where you have preganglionic neurons that connect with postganglionic neurons. Uh, in the sympathetic system, you have sympathetic ganglia that are near the spinal cord. Now, we'll show you a picture in a couple of slides. Um, while the parasympathetic ganglia are near or within target organs. And so the autonomic nervous system uses this pattern to regulate functions. It maintains homeostasis, like we mentioned in the previous slide in more detail. But it does all this by coordinating responses between those sensory inputs. The central nervous system does the processing, and then the motor outputs to various organs. All right, figure 22-2 shows the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, which includes the sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways. And although these pathways operate separately, most autonomic effectors like the heart, lungs, and digestive organs receive inputs from both these systems. So let's go ahead and talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic pathways separately. In the sympathetic pathway, the purpose again was to prepare the body for fight or flight responses. It does this by increasing heart rate, dilating pupils, and all that other stuff we mentioned. The structure is you have preganglionic neurons that start in the thoracic and the lumbar spinal cord. They synapse in the sympathetic chain or the collateral ganglia, and then postganglionic neurons extend to those target organs. In the parasympathetic pathways, remember the purpose was to promote rest and digest. It does this by slowing down the heart rate and stimulating more digestion. The structure of the parasympathetic pathway is that it has preganglionic neurons that start in the brainstem or the sacral spinal cord. They synapse in the ganglia near or within some target organs, and then you have postganglionic neurons that stimulate the organs. Now, there also is some co-innervation that we mentioned as an overlap. So most effectors are influenced by both pathways. This allows for balanced adaptive control of bodily functions. So for instance, the sympathetic system speeds up the heart while the parasympathetic system slows it down. And that helps maintain that homeostasis. So we mentioned that the automatic nervous system controls involuntary functions through two main pathways, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and then both are involved in a sequence of two efferent neurons. So you got postganglionic and preganglionic. To start off with the preganglionic, Those originate in the central nervous system and sends a signal to the ganglion. The postganglionic neurons, those pick up the signal from the ganglion and transmit it to the target organs. When you're looking at the sympathetic pathway, again, preparing for fight or flight, the preganglionic neurons start in the thoracic lumbar spinal. They travel to sympathetic chain ganglia that are near the spine, and the postganglionic neurons extend to organs to promote those rapid responses. If you're looking at in comparison to the parasympathetic pathway, which purpose was the rest and digest, the steps are that the preganglionic neurons start in the brainstem or the sacral cord. They travel to the ganglia near or within those target organs. And then postganglionic neurons stimulate organs to facilitate relaxation and digestion. So in both pathways, ganglia act as switching stations and plexuses serve as network of nerves. And they do this to efficiently distribute signals. And this system allows the body to respond quickly to stress while also managing relaxation and recovery. Okay, the structure of the sympathetic pathways, sympathetic preganglion neurons. So, in the sympathetic nervous system, you have preganglionic neurons that originate in the lateral great horns of the thoracic and lumbar spinal segments, T1 and T1 to L2. I'm repeating myself, but um, hopefully some of this information will stick by repetition. Right. Uh, so yeah, the segments T1 to L2, this defines that thoracolumbar division. The neurons, they have relatively short axons because they synapse in sympathetic ganglia. And you'll see this in an image soon enough. Right, so they synapse in the sympathetic ganglia that are close to the spinal cord. And then there are three main pathways for the preganglionic fibers to go. The sympathetic chain ganglia, which we call the sympathetic trunk, the splanchnic nerves, and the collateral ganglia. In the sympathetic ganglia, or sympathetic chain ganglia, it's made up of preganglionic fibers that can synapse in ganglia. And in ganglia, the sympathetic chain, and that runs parallel to the spinal cord. The splanchnic nerves, some of those preganglionic fibers continue through the splanchnic nerves and they reach the collateral or the prevertebral ganglia. And these are located anterior to the vertebral column near the abdominal aorta. And then you have finally the collateral ganglia. In the collateral ganglia, postganglionic neurons extend to target organs. They provide widespread effects throughout the body. And this setup helps ensure that the sympathetic system can coordinate complex, widespread responses during stress or during emergencies. In the sympathetic nervous system, postganglionic neurons have their cell bodies and dendrites primarily in the sympathetic chain ganglia, the paravertebral ganglia, as we mentioned, or the collateral ganglia, the prevertebral ganglia. These ganglia are strategically placed to facilitate widespread responses. The sympathetic chain ganglia are located on either side of the spinal cord. Um, they look like, I kind of have to give you an image. They look like the pole chain of a ceiling fan. If you think of the pole chain with the little knobs, that's kind of what the thing looks like. Not silver, of course. Oh my gosh. Okay, so in the sympathetic nervous system, you have postganglionic neurons that have their cell bodies and dendrites primarily in the sympathetic chain ganglia or the paravertebral ganglia or the collateral ganglia, which is the prevertebral ganglia. And these ganglia are strategically placed to facilitate widespread responses. So the sympathetic chain ganglia are located on either side of the spinal cord. It kind of looks like the pull chain on a ceiling fan, or one of those light ceiling fans, the chain part. So the collateral ganglia, they're found anterior to the vertebral column near the abdominal aorta. You also have the postganglionic neurons. These are long. They extend from the ganglia to their target organs, and this allows them to exert this widespread effect throughout the body. I'll show you an image, a couple of more slides, and so hopefully that one image will make sense after all, everything we're talking about here. The gray ramus mentioned here in the slide. Uh, the gray ramus communicates. Gray ramus communicans. It connects the ganglia that we mentioned to the spinal nerves. It facilitates the distribution of those sympathetic signals. Okay. So in the parasympathetic nervous system, um, the preganglionic neurons have their cell bodies in the brainstem nuclei or the lateral gray columns of the sacrospinal cord, and their axons travel long distances via cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10, as mentioned there in the slide, and some pelvic nerves. Right, and these extend from the brainstem and the sacrospinal cord. So these are long axons, relatively speaking, long axons, and they allow the preganglionic neurons to reach ganglia that are close to or within those target organs. So the ganglia, known as terminal ganglia, um, are situated near or they're embedded within the walls of the target organs, and this enables a precise and localized control of organ functions. All right, continuing with the parasympathetic pathways, parasympathetic postganglion neurons. So in this slide, the parasympathetic nervous system postganglionic neurons, these are characterized by their short length and proximity to target organs. So their cell bodies and dendrites are located in parasympathetic ganglia, which are either near or within the target organs themselves. And this short distance between the ganglia and the target organs allows for very localized and specific responses because the postganglionic neurons are so close to their target. The effects of the parasympathetic stimulation, they typically involve only one organ at a time. So this setup helps ensure precise control over functions such as digestion, salivation, and reduction of heart rate, and so forth. Okay, this slide, autonomic neurotransmitters and receptors. So again, in this autonomic nervous system, we have neurotransmitters that are released by neuron axon terminals, and it's either norepinephrine, abbreviated NE, or acetylcholine, abbreviated ACH, as you see up there on the slide. Looking at the pathways, the sympathetic pathways and parasympathetic pathways for each. So the sympathetic pathways for these neurotransmitters within the preganglionic neurons and postganglionic neurons is how we're breaking it up. In the preganglionic neurons, they release the acetylcholine. This activates what are called nicotinic receptors on the postganglionic neurons. The postganglionic neurons mostly release norepinephrine, NE. This acts like an adrenergic, receptor, alpha beta, in those target organs. So uh, everything except for like sweat glands, postganglionic neurons release acetylcholine. And all this, again, we're talking about the sympathetic pathway. Within the parasympathetic pathway, again, we have the preganglionic neurons and postganglionic neurons. We'll start off in the preganglionic neurons. Here, acetylcholine is released, activating the nicotinic receptors on postganglionic neurons. And at the postganglionic neurons, it also releases acetylcholine. This acts on the muscarinic receptors in target organs. And this particular system ensures precise regulation of various physiological processes that we won't go into detail here. Okay, finally, the picture that I told you I was going to show you. This actually does describe a lot of the slides we discussed before. The text slides is summarized here. So this is figure 22-5. It shows location of autonomic neurotransmitters and receptors. In all pathways, preganglionic fibers are cholinergic, secreting acetylcholine, which stimulates nicotinic receptors in the postganglionic neuron. I'm reading the caption from the image, 22.5. It says most sympathetic postganglionic fibers are adrenergic, secreting norepinephrine, thus stimulating alpha or beta adrenergic receptors, and a few sympathetic postganglionic fibers are cholinergic, stimulating muscarinic receptors in effector cells All parasympathetic postganglionic fibers are cholinergic, stimulating muscarinic receptor cells and effector cells. You're probably asking yourself, why am I studying all this? You never know when you're going to need it. If you're doing something in laboratory, yeah, this will be useful. Doing something in biochemistry, something in physiology. If you're in one of the technical fields where you're doing something like X-ray, sonography, um, this detail may not be as critical for you. So just to kind of summarize this slide, in the autonomic nervous system, we said all preganglionic fibers release acetylcholine. They activate nicotinic receptors on the postganglionic neurons, and most sympathetic postganglionic fibers release norepinephrine. They stimulate alpha or beta adrenergic receptors and a few cholinergic. They use acetylcholine to activate muscarinic receptors, and all parasympathetic postganglionic fibers release acetylcholine. This activates muscarinic receptors on effector cells. Okay. All right, next slide is norepinephrine and its receptors. So we're going to go a little bit more into detail. I'm going to repeat some of the stuff, but I'm going to just go into a little bit more detail. So it's really not as much information per slide as you think. I'm actually repeating myself. So norepinephrine and its receptors. Slide 15. Norepinephrine, right? We abbreviate that NE. It's not doing that in the slides, but yeah, it's NE. And epinephrine, they bind to, we said, adrenergic receptors on cells. They trigger responses in different organs. But there's two types of cells we've been talking about, the alpha cells and beta cells, right? Or alpha receptors and beta receptors. Within those, they break them down further, right? Alpha receptors have alpha 1 and 2. Beta receptors have beta 2 and 3, right? And let me discuss these in brief detail. So with the alpha receptors, alpha 1, these are located inside the blood vessels. They cause vasoconstriction and they increase blood pressure. Alpha 2, these are found in the nervous system and they inhibit further release of norepinephrine. The beta receptors, they're beta 1, these are inside the heart and they increase heart rate and contraction force. Beta 2, these are in the lungs and other smooth muscles and they cause relaxation or if it's in the lungs, bronchodilation. And beta 3 receptors, these are in fat tissue and this regulates fat breakdown. So to terminate their action, norepinephrine and epinephrine are broken down by two enzymes you see mentioned there on the slide. MAO, which is monoamine oxidase. This is found in nerve terminals and in the liver, so it converts them to inactive forms. Then you have the next one, catechol-O-methyltransferase. If it ends in an ASE, it's an enzyme. So monoamine oxidase, ASE, that's an enzyme. Catechol-O-methyltransferase, that's an enzyme, if you ever want to know. Yeah, so if enzymes just facilitate reactions, either to speed something up, reduce something, or break something down. Anyway, the COMT, that's found in various tissues. It adds, chemically, it adds the methyl groups to deactivate them. And this type of regulation ensures that responses to stress are temporary and controlled. Okay, this slide is on acetylcholine and its receptors. What did we talk about last time? Norepinephrine and its receptors. Okay, acetylcholine and its receptors. So what is acetylcholine? We've been talking about it. It's a neurotransmitter. It interacts with cholinergic receptors. It transmits signals in the nervous system, and it binds to two main types of cholinergic receptors. We mentioned these, the nicotinic receptors and the muscarinic receptors. The nicotinic receptors, these are located in autonomic ganglia. This is where preganglionic and postganglionic neurons connect, right? And they're located also in the neuromuscular junctions. And this is where motor neurons meet skeletal muscle. I'll show you some slides. No, I did show you some slides in the last lecture on that, the neurojunction. Anyway, binding here leads to rapid responses like muscle contraction. When we're talking about the muscarinic receptors, these are found in the parasympathetic target organs, such as the heart and digestive tract. These bind to receptors that cause slower, prolonged effects like reducing heart rate or enhancing digestion. Acetylcholine's action is terminated by an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. Remember, I said anything with an ASE is an enzyme. This is an enzyme that quickly breaks it down into choline and acetate. It ensures that the neurotransmitters effects are just brief and allows the system to reset for further signals. And so this is a process that's used to ensure that you have precise control over muscle and organ functions. Okay, here we have figure 22-6. I'm just going to read the caption under the image. You can get this from the book as well. Figure 22-6 shows functions of autonomic neurotransmitters and receptors. Figure A, norepinephrine released from adrenergic fibers binds to alpha or beta adrenergic receptors according to the lock and key model to produce regulatory effects in the postsynaptic cell. And then figure B, to its right, acetylcholine released from cholinergic fibers similarly binds to muscarinic or nicotinic cholinergic receptors to produce postsynaptic regulatory effects. No extra information. Hopefully this summarizes the last couple of slides that we discussed. Okay, slide 18, non-adrenergic, non-cholinergic transmission, or NANCI transmission. All right, so NANCI transmission involves neurotransmitters other than the standard norepinephrine or acetylcholine that we've discussed. These transmitters are things like nitric oxide, vasoactive intestinal peptides, adenosine triphosphate. You might know that one as ATP. You can buy that over the counter. Not really, but sort of. Neuropeptide Y or MPY. That's released alongside norepinephrine and acetylcholine. Right? They bind to receptors on target cells or nerve cells. They modulate the effects of norepinephrine or acetylcholine. So this is co-transmission, and it allows for more precise control and regulation of bodily functions, and it helps enhance adaptability and homeostasis. All right, slide 19, synaptic complexity and pharmacology. So neurotransmitters and their receptors vary widely in their functioning at duly innervated autonomic effector cells. This means that organs that receive signals from both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves occurs. So you have to understand this this varied interaction to understand the pharmacology. So we have two interactions, an agonist and antagonist. And an agonist, a drug that's considered an agonist is a drug that will activate some receptor to produce some desired response. It can mimic the action of natural neurotransmitters. And an antagonist is a drug that blocks receptors. It prevents natural neurotransmitters from binding, and it inhibits their effect. And so knowing what's an agonist and what's an antagonist, helps design medications that can precisely target specific receptors. This helps treat various types of conditions by either enhancing or blocking an autonomic signal. Slide 20, overview of the autonomic functions. So the autonomic nervous system maintains and quickly restores homeostasis in the body, or else you pass out or die in some cases, right? And this involves the principle of autonomic antagonism. This is where the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, they exert opposite influences, so their intention. And like, for example, the sympathetic division increasing heart rate, while parasympathetic division decreases it to keep it optimal, to keep it at the right rate, so you won't pass out, so your brain continues receiving oxygen continuously. So these opposing actions, they summate, right? They can either, um, uh, what'd you say? They summate, right? And they balance bodily functions. So this is the emerging theory, right? And so it suggests that they can also have a synergistic or cooperative effect. So they work together to fine-tune physiological responses. In engineering and in signals, uh, when two signals are in phase, they um, they increase the effect of their summation, and when they're out of phase, they actually work against each other. Trying to think of the names that we use in engineering for like a destructive and a constructive signal, but it's kind of the same thing here. Okay. All right. The hierarchy of autonomic regulation. So autonomic regulation is organized in a hierarchy. It centers at various brain levels. I was about to do a joke there, but I didn't do it. I lost my train of thought. So the cerebral cortex that has the highest ranked autonomic centers that directs the signals to the hypothalamus. Then that relays them to other regions. So the autonomic responses are typically involuntary. Um, they can sometimes be controlled at will, like swallowing or breathing or heart rate through deep exercise, but they're not dependent on voluntary control. They shouldn't be. Slide 22, functions of the sympathetic division. So again, we're on the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. It's divided into those two branches we said. We're just summarizing here, sympathetic, parasympathetic divisions. Each division has distinct functions, operates in complementary ways to maintain balance within the body. And let's just do a little review and a little comparison. The sympathetic division, we said that was a fight or flight system. Um, it prepared the body for stressful emergency situations. Its actions were aimed to optimize physical performance and increasing alertness. The neurotransmitters were primarily norepinephrine and epinephrine when released from the adrenal glands. And the key effects of this were to um, affect the heart, the lungs, digestive system, pupils, blood vessels, sweat glands, and I'll go over each one. So increasing heart rate, for example, increasing the force of contraction, which increases the blood flow to the muscles. Within the lungs, dilating the bronchioles, and that just means opening up the bronchioles, so that improves airflow. You can breathe more air. The digestive system, it inhibits digestion, and is doing this to conserve energy for more intense activities. So again, it's reducing gastrointestinal motility. Pupils dilate, so pupils dilate to improve vision and increase awareness. Your blood vessels will constrict to certain parts of the body, and it redirects that to the essential vital organs that you need for whatever stressful situation you're in. Sweat glands are activated, right? So it'll stimulate sweating, and it'll help regulate body temperature because you will get uh, warm, hot in a stressful situation. All right, functions of the parasympathetic division. Again, kind of like a review. The function was, we said rest and digest, if you can remember that, it rhymes. So the parasympathetic division, it promotes relaxation, recovery, energy conservation. It's active during restful states and it supports a restorative process. The neurotransmitter is primarily acetylcholine. And again, how it affects the key organs, hearts, lung, digestive system, pupils, blood vessels, sweat glands. Just the opposite of the sympathetic. The heart rate is decreased, reducing force of contraction. The lungs, the bronchioles will constrict, and this reduces airflow. It restricts back to normal level. It's not going to make it, where you can't breathe unless you have asthma or something. The digestive system, your digestion gets stimulated, so you start digesting again, and it promotes nutrient absorption. So now that you have time to absorb nutrients and you're out of an emergency situation, your pupils will constrict. This is to protect your eyes from excessive light. And then it just helps aid in focusing on nearby objects. Your blood vessels, um, they're more focused on their function. They're not dilated, so they're not constricted where they were before, and they're not dilated where they were before. So it kind of just goes back to a normal level. Sweat glands, the parasympathetic division doesn't really have a big effect on the sweat glands. It's it doesn't have an inhibitory effect. You just slow down sweating because of the um, sympathetic system. Okay, the big picture, ANS and the whole body. This lecture went much quicker, and I'm hoping it's because I'm doing audio recording only and not video. Um, so, yeah. Yeah, the big picture, ANS and the whole body. So let's compare response to stress. Sympathetic activates in response to stress or danger. Parasympathetic activates during restful states. The sympathetic prepares you for quick action. The parasympathetic helps you recover and maintain bodily functions. The overall effect on the body functions, the sympathetic increases alertness, energy expenditure. It makes you physically ready. The parasympathetic focuses on energy conservation. It helps with repair and maintenance of the body. And the duration of both within the sympathetic, this produces immediate temporal effects, right? Temporal just means time to handle something that's acute. So you don't want to be in a stressful situation for too long. Your body doesn't handle that very well. To get out of a situation, either going to fight or flight. Uh, the duration for the parasympathetic, this is slower. It produces a longer effect to support recovery and digestion, and that's just the nature of the game there. So if we summarize these, the sympathetic division prepares the body for action, heightened states of alertness. The parasympathetic division focuses on relaxation, recovery, and then maintaining normal bodily functions. So sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest. Thank you very much. And I'm going to record on this last slide. Any questions? Okay, thank you.